Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good evening, everyone. Today, for this sutra session, which we have restarted this year, we did have this Wednesday Sutra class happening on a weekly basis for some time up until it came to an end because of my engagements. But we have now started this Sutra session on a Wednesday night again this year, because we have, through our study, seen the importance that the sutras also play in one understanding the Dhamma and going into a depth of Dhamma that we are studying with the Abhidhamma. But on the other side, how the sutras facilitate our practice and how it so keenly helps in the molding of the mind, the way of thought, in a manner that it supports and allows a practitioner, meditator, to take steps, progressive steps in their journey forward, So for today, we have the sutra. I have selected the sutra, which is known as the Sattaka Moggallana Sutra. The Sattaka Moggallana Sutra, Sattaka because it has 7 particular points that it expresses. Some of you might know this sutra from a different name. It is also called the Pacalā Sutra or the Pacalā Sutra. Pacalā Sutra. That might be a name that you might know better. So in this Pacalā Sutra, we have the scenario of Venerable Mahamoggallana, who was not yet enlightened, but he was a practitioner at the time and he was struggling with a case of drowsiness. And when the Buddha comes to know that Moggallana is facing this impediment or hindrance to the practice, the Buddha appears right before Venerable Moggallana, and he teaches these teachings to Venerable Moggallana as a support rendered by a teacher to a student to overcome the hindrances faced in the meditation. In this sutra, the Buddha gives us 8 particular points, but it is known as the Sattaka, or it is in the Sattaka Nipata, because out of the 8, the first 7 are essentially techniques or methods, and should none of these 7 work, the last point taught by the Buddha is, Moggallana, simply go and rest. Because you have tried everything, you have exhausted everything that you could possibly do to keep the practice going, to remain mindful, but now you can go and rest, because that is what you need, right? If these 7 do not work. So let me share with you the sutra, And we will read it together and discuss the points as we go on. The Pacalā Sutta, the discourse on nodding off. Thus have I heard, at one time, the Blessed One was staying in the deer park in Pacalā forest at Susumara Giri in the Bagga country. At the time, the Venerable Mahamoggallana was sitting and nodding while trying to meditate in the village of Pacalā Mutta in Magadha. The forest was the forest that they were staying at, Susumma Margiri. The forest where the monastery is a part of a larger estate, which belongs this Pacalā forest was owned by a Yakini, right? A Yakini. This Yakini is not in the terms of a preta or a inhuman being. They were from the Yakka Gotra, the Yakka Kalli, right? And they own the forest, and it was within this forest that the Buddha was at the time, the monastery, or rather, where the monks were residing. It is near this area that the house of Nakula Mata and Nakula Pita were also located. So it is nearby this area. At the time, the Venerable Mahamoggallana was sitting and nodding while trying to meditate in the village of Pacalā Mutta in Magadha. Through the divine eye clairvoyance, purified and surpassing the human, the Blessed One saw the Venerable Mahamoggallana sitting and nodding in the village of Pacalā Mutta in Magadha. The Buddha, through his divine eye, we have discussed before how the Buddha, although the Buddha might be far away from the monks, where the monks are residing or deciding to reside themselves, the Buddha, through his clairvoyance, through his Dibba Chakku, he observes the monks who are near and far. He observes the practitioners who are near and far. Such is the Mahakaruna of the Buddha. The Buddha realizes that as a teacher, he must be watchful over the students. And in doing so, this is one such instance where the Buddha, through his clairvoyance, sees that one of his students, in this scenario, Mahamoggallana, is in need of karmasthana. Then, just as a strong man would stretch his flexed arm or would flex his stretched arm, the Buddha disappeared from the deer park in the Pacalā forest in Sumsumaragiri in the Bagga country and immediately appeared before the Venerable Mahamoggallana, sitting and nodding in the village of Pacalā Mutta in Magadha. The Blessed One sat down on a prepared seat. And now, having sat down, the Blessed One said this to the Venerable Mahamoggallana. Are you nodding, Moggallana? Are you nodding, Moggallana? Yes, Bhante. Then the Buddha now preaches this part of Dhamma. Mental noting. In that case, Moggallana, When you perceive that drowsiness is descending upon you, you should make a mental note of that perception. You should make a mental note of that perception. Frequently make that perception. Frequently make that perception. It is possible that when you do so, that drowsiness would go away. Now, when it comes to mentally noting, now let us read this paragraph again. In that case, Moggallana, when you perceive that drowsiness is descending upon you, you should make a mental note of that perception, right? Now, within the Attakatha, this explains, gives us a bit more depth into what the Buddha is saying here. Now, we know that when it comes to the classifications of the Dhamma, the classifications of the Dhamma are primarily seen as skandhas. When we talk about skandhas, we have 5 skandhas. These are known as aggregates, we know. The 5 aggregates. Then we have the 12 ayatanas, the 12 faculties. And then the 18 dhatus, the 18 elements, both composing both of mind and body. Mind and body. Now, in having these 3 in your mind, this mental noting differs, right, according to the practice of the skandhas, the dhatus, and then the ayatanas. Sorry, skandha, ayatana, and the dhatus. It is important to understand this because I think previously, when we had a session to discuss the which was the sutra that I did earlier, the I forget. We did this during the Katina season. The sutra, I forget the name of the sutra, but I mentioned to you that in contemplation of the Dhamma, that contemplation can be done through the skandha technique, the ayatana technique, and the dhatu technique. Now, when you look at the skandhas, noting the skandhas or noting in accordance to the skandhas, we find a vertical approach, right? The skandha is a vertical approach. Because if you are to write, even if you are to write Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana, you would write this down and you would see first we had the Rupa, which is one of the aggregates, and then you would have the rest of the 4 would be categorized into mind, Now, as a meditator or practitioner, when you are following the 5 skandha approach, right, the 5 aggregate approach to the moment, to the dhammas that are arising of the now, right here, right now, then you would see that you see the rupa, and then upon seeing the rupa, you would now try to come back to the moment of sense or go towards the moment of the mind. Does that make sense? It is a vertical approach to the practice. Is that clear? Am I alone here today?
Not very clear, Bhante.
Not clear enough, Bhante, please.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I may do this, right? If I may share my screen, right? And show you in this way. Did that work? Sorry, give me a moment. Right. If I may show it to you in this way. When it comes to the 5 aggregates, now we very well know the 5 aggregates: mind, and then we have matter, right? Matter, nama, rupa. If we are simply looking at the 5 aggregates, if we are taking the basic teaching, let's say, ditte, ditta matta, right? Ditte, ditta matta. Ditte, ditta matta. What does ditte, ditta matta mean? Ditte, ditta matta is seeing the seeing as just seeing, not going into the proliferated thought process, but maintaining the mind in a position where you are simply at the point of seeing, right? If we are to, I'm trying my level best not to go into Abhidhamma, but if we are to just speak about that through the Abhidhamma, ditte dittamattang, ditte dittamattang would be in a mindo process, what we would do, or sorry, in a sense do process, this is the I here, the I. So from the sense consciousness onto the place the mindo starts, this place, right? So this would be Chakku Vinyana Sampatichana Santirana. Those 3 places, especially when you're at the moment of contact, you are able to gauge a Dhamma, let us say. I'm not going to name the Dhamma, let us say a Dhamma. From this position onwards, what we see is not a Dhamma, but a Panyati, a convention, a sammuti, a prajnapti that is made. So the meditator, when we say ditte dittamattang, the position that we are pointed towards is being in this position here. But of course, a meditator first realizes that he realizes the object first. From the object comes down to the position of a process, which is the seeing process, the seeing. And from the seeing, now here there is identification. In this position, you might try to maintain yourself between identification and non-identification by not trying to go too further into the object. However, this place of seeing is this position here. Does that make sense? In order to do this, for a person who is following the 5 aggregates, that person would see the rupa, form, and through the form, see the mind below. That is why they would say that it is a vertical process, because in this path of practice, you go up and down the 5 aggregates respectively. Does that make sense now? Is that a bit more clearer now? Any questions, anyone? Is that a bit more clearer now? If not, I feel there might be a bit of questions there. Maybe when we look at the 18 dhatus, it will be a bit more clear. In the 18 dhatus, now look at this. These are the 18 dhatus, right? Elements. They're both mind and matter, right? Mind and matter, not just matter. It's mind and matter. Now, when we look at the 18 process, one might imagine, how does one go about looking at 18, looking at the mind and body in 18 parts? In 18 parts. Just in the same manner that you looked at the 5 aggregates here, because form has nothing else around it. Feeling has nothing else around it, horizontal to it. Feeling is feeling, form is form. So 28 rupas, 1 chaitasika, 50 chaitasikas, 89 chittas. Right? There, we categorize all of these 20 into just rupakkhanda. Feeling, that's all there is, just feeling there. Perception is on one line there again. In that manner, they only go, the practice takes you up and down the 5 aggregates, trying to see what condition, what hetupala, or how this mind and matter connectivity operates. When we take the 18 dhatus are not a vertical practice. It is a horizontal practice, as they call it. Why? How? Because in the 18 dhatu technique, a meditator first sees the form. Through the form, the meditator has 2 choices to make, or rather 1 choice in this case. Through the form, do I go to the I consciousness? Do I go to the I materiality, the sensitivity, base of sensitivity? This is why they call it horizontal. So every external and internal stimuli which presents itself into this very moment, where the meditator sits here pondering, letting go as it comes, trying to discern, go deeper, in the 18 dhatu or the elements technique, the meditator just does not see form and move over to sound. No, to complete form, the meditator sees the form, sees the consciousness which sees the form, and sees the location where this consciousness arises to take the form. In that manner, the practice goes horizontal to itself. The practice goes horizontal to itself. it is almost as if, in a practical sense, when you are in your mind trying to see, let us say, the form or even a thought, mind, thought, and mind consciousness, even in that position, it presents itself as a linkage that positions itself almost right next to one another. But drawing the line between them to know its individual boundaries becomes that practice, where we know this is the thought, this is the object, this is the consciousness, and this is the base, the material base, the rupa base, material base. So in the 18 dhatu, the meditator sees the object, sees the mind that supports or can take that object, sees the base where the object hits or occurs. That is the 18 dhatu technique. Does that make more sense in comparison to the 5 aggregate approach? Any questions, anyone? All right. If there are no questions, then coming back to the position of mentally noting, here the meditator strives to note the position where the nodding arises or the nodding is sensed, and that would be at the sense consciousness, the place where the sense consciousness takes place. Sense consciousness takes place, or the mind object occurs, or the mind object, or the mind object. Coming back from noting, from noting, we come back to the sutra. Mentally noting in that case, Venerable Moggallana, when you perceive that drowsiness is descending upon you, you should make a mental note of that perception. Frequently make that perception. It is possible that when you do so, that drowsiness would go away. The second part, if Moggallana, that drowsiness still would not go away, then Moggallana, you should think about, ponder over, mentally attend to a teaching that you have learned, that you have mastered. What does this mean? Now, we know that in our meditation, we would be told to again and again bring your mind back to the object. So what is it about mental reflection? Here, mental reflection is a manner through which you balance the indriyas, you balance the faculties in order to now be able to continue with the meditation. When you reflect upon a piece of teaching, obviously, that teaching that comes to the mind at that moment when you're in your practice would be something that touches you in a certain way, something that inspires you. You stick to that teaching, and through that teaching arouse a sense of virya, effort, towards the practice again, when you're feeling a sense of drowsiness. This drowsiness that is spoken of here, of course, Venerable Moggallana was nodding away with drowsiness, but drowsiness could arise in so many different ways and levels, right? So this drowsiness could be at its very early stages or at the stage where you are almost asleep in your meditation, nodding off. In all of those positions, number one, mentally, if you are able to catch the drowsiness at a position before the drowsiness matures into being so powerful that it overtakes the mind and body and overtakes what you are doing, then of course that is far from desirable. Mentally noting sati, alerting or putting the sati, putting the drowsiness into sati sampajanya should be a way that we are trying to now keep up, continue with the practice. Continue with the practice. Mentally noting. Now, in this case, mental noting is a sasankarika noting that arises. Here, because of the drowsiness, the Buddha is giving a teaching, and because of that teaching now, Venerable Moggallana would himself go into his meditation and then contemplate when that drowsiness occurs again, as he would contemplate and put the Buddha's teachings into practice, it comes from a position of where it is inspired by the teaching. So it will have a sense of promptitude in that. Once you do it, once it works for you, now you will start, or the mind will be able to, as it says here, frequently attend to that perception. What perception? Perception or noting the drowsy mind. Frequently make it a point to note that drowsy mind. And in doing so, the drowsiness would have gone away. The second, reflection. Now here the reflection comes upon a teaching that inspires you, a teaching that brings about a sense of virya aimed towards the practice. When such kind of teaching occurs, it would then, for it to be taken or for it to be useful to the moment, it has to be a jnana sampayutta, not a jnana vipayutta. What does this mean? Jnana sampayutta. Let us talk about jnana vipayutta first. Let us say jnana vipayutta. We might know sutras. We might know sutras in a manner where we are able to recite them, right? Recite them. We might know them by heart, right? And we know the Metta Sutra, the Mangal Sutra, the Ratana Sutra. Let us say one of these sutras comes to mind, right? One of these sutras comes to mind. And in it coming to mind, we attend to that sutra, because now the Buddha says reflect on something so that the mind rises out of that sense of drowsiness. So we attend to something, we attend to a teaching, right? In our mind, still the eyes are closed, right? Still the eyes are closed, and we attend to the teaching. When we are attending to the teaching, we are attending to a memory of the teaching, it can very well be jnana vipayutta. How? Let us say you're just reflecting on it. You're just reflecting on it, not discerning or taking it in a way of wisdom, but simply just reciting it in mind, let us say, that becomes a jnana vipayutta, not a jnana sampayutta. When there is a proper reflection done, especially in a circumstance like this, where we are trying to arouse a sense of virya, then that mind that is doing the reflection should be a jnana sampayutta, not a vipayutta. In the jnana sampayutta, the prajna, the wisdom, the discernment takes an active role in the mind. In that wisdom and discernment taking an active role in mind, what we come to realize is through that power of prajna, it just starts to make sense. It starts to make sense. The insights gradually start to rise, coming back into this position. Coming back to this position of what we explained as a Dhamma, as a prajnapti. It is taught by the teachers to always maintain these insights at the level of sense consciousness and not to bring it over to the mind base. What does this mean? Again, if I might repeat myself, the teachers, the masters tell us that when these insights of mind occur, to always maintain these insights at a level of sense consciousness, but not to bring over to the mind-o, right? Not to bring over to the mind-o. Why do you think that is? Anyone?
Bhante, can you ask the question again, please?
Yes. So when insights occur,
Yeah.
when the insight starts to occur, right?
Mm.
Like lotuses blooming, right? The masters say that these insights that occur, to always leave them at a position of the sense consciousness. When we are talking about a viti, we spoke earlier about keeping it ditte dittamattang, leaving it at the level that the sense consciousness arises, right? Not to bring it over or not to observe the seeing at the mind, but to bring it on to the sense consciousness. The teachers say, in the same manner, when these insights occur, don't bring it on to the mind or leave it at the sense base.
Is it because the Dhammavitarka will come along and then you make Sankara and more Javanas? Whereas at the sense, though the seeing, even the insight is as pure as it is seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without pollution of your own vitakkas.
Yes. Without the pollution of your own mind, right? To maintain the vipassana or what that insight that occurs in the mind, to nurture it at the position of the sense base. What, in other words, Shiroma, in other words, when an insight occurs, leaving it at the sense consciousness level means that you don't turn it into a mundane prajnapti. That you don't turn it into a mundane prajnapti, that you will never be able to turn it into a mundane prajnapti. Right?
It will be left in its purest form
Yes.
of the insight itself. Isn't it?
At the insight itself. Don't try to connect the insight into the prajnapti, and then you are weakening the power of that insight if you are trying to do that more and more. Meaning, when those insights occur, they are at its purest form when remembered and nurtured in their original state. Right? In the if we take this example, let us say, now there might be sayings or there might be events of our life from a long time ago, let us say, a long time ago when, let us say, grandparents used to say, when we would meet them, they would say certain things and it sticks with you. Does that make sense? It sticks with you. So time to time you remember, right? Remember these little sayings or things that they would do, or those little sayings, and in your mind it is like a aha moment where it kind of inspires you to do something else or inspires you in a certain way, right? Now those kinds of moments, what if we are to put it into logic? Forget the original saying or the sentence, not give mind to the original saying or the sentence, and just remember the logic that we put together as a result of it. Now, in some way or another, the beauty of that moment diminishes. The beauty of the moment that we held, it diminished in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
So we remember the original. In the same manner, the insight should nurture or continue within the mind in a position where that original insight is nurtured, not the way that we sort of logically analyze it. And maintain that insight in that same manner within the mind. I wonder whether that is clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here, now the second one, now reflection, jnanagata sampayutta, with knowledge, with discernment working in the mind. With discernment working in the mind, we attend to a teaching. When that is done, the jnana sampayutta, the with knowledge aspect or the working discernment or the prajna that is working, what that would do is it would bring energy into the practice, into the moment, into the mind, enabling you to do away with the drowsiness and to connect with the practice for that moment deeper and deeper. The third is recitation. If Moggallana, that drowsiness still would not go away, then Moggallana, you should recite in detail a teaching that you have learned. It is possible that when you do so, that drowsiness would go away. So reciting a sutra, a paritta, right, in your mind or very, very softly, and maintain in the mind with it, maintain in the mind the attention, the sati with it, right? So you do not tend to the drowsiness, but you are focusing upon what is at hand. You're focusing upon what is at hand, the practice, the awareness, the sati sampajanya. Thus, you recover or come out of that sluggish state of mind into a position where you are now having sati again, coming from now this recitation that you do, only if the ones before did not work. Then the fifth one is a massage. If Moggallana, that drowsiness still would not go away, then Moggallana, you should rub both your ears in a circular motion and massage your limbs and massage your limbs. Massage your limbs it is possible that when you do so, that drowsiness would go away. The sixth one. So the fifth one is to create that bodily flow of blood to ease the drowsiness and to get the blood flowing a bit more so that you come out of this state of drowsiness as it would be easily understood. 5. Look around. If Moggallana, that drowsiness still would not go away, then Moggallana, you should rise, wash your eyes with some water, look around yourself, and look up at the stars and constellations. It is possible that when you do so, that drowsiness would go away. That drowsiness would go away. So to change the object, should the others not work, get up from your seat, wash your eyes, wash your face, go breathe some air, take a look around, look at the stars, the constellations, and still you can see that the Buddha does not tell one to rest, even if one is to get up, right? It is only a way of energizing yourself for a bit to come back to the practice, not to completely stop the practice then and there, right? The sixth one, perception of light. If Moggallana, that drowsiness still would not go away, then Moggallana, you should practice the perception of light. Determine the perception of daylight. Just as day is, so is night. Just as night is, so is day. Another name for the perception of light in Pali, we would know this as perception of light, aloka sanya. There's another term for aloka sanya or light meditation. It is day meditation or divasanya. Divasanya, D-I-V long A, divasanya. Divasanya or aloka sanya, it is the same practice. Two words for the same practice. Divasanya has, just as it mentions here, determined the perception of daylight. Divasanya is perception of day or perception of daylight. Just as day is, so is night. Just as night is, so is day. Thus, through a mind that is open and unhindered, one should cultivate a bright light, mind of bright light. It is possible that when you do so, that drowsiness would go away. Now, what is this aloka sanya? And what is the talk about just as day is, so is night? Just as night is, so is day. It is a particular way of cultivating aloka sanya, or the perception of light. How you do it is in this manner. There are two specific ways. This is one way. The other way is through a light. You could even at this time use a flashlight pointed towards a wall, or looking at, let us say, the morning sun. You could cultivate aloka sanya. Another technique is this specific technique which this sutra is talking about, which is you stand outside or in front of a window with bright daylight. And as you stand, or maybe even sit, why not? Sit or stand in front of a window with full bright daylight. And you focus the eyes into the middle of this vision, or rather image, that you have as your eyes are well lit and when opened, and you consider as day or light, right? Day or light. And then you close your eyes. Then you open it again, and then you take the perception of the light that is there in front of you. You close your eyes again. You do this again and again and again and again. The light will stick, and you will start seeing it when you close your eyes. You will start seeing it when you close your eyes. And when you start seeing it, as you close your eyes now, you contemplate on this as light, light, light. It will become bright and luminous. It will spread all across the body. The light, or the perception of light, has a particular result upon the mind and body. Everything begins to be light. Light in feel, and light in the way that it is relaxed, not tensed. Everything starts easing up under the practice of the perception of light. So the perception of light is a technique that was used by many monks at the time of the Buddha, as it is spoken of so often when it comes to warding off different types of distraction, even when it comes to hatred. This perception of light has been used throughout the sutras, we see, as a way of warding off distraction and bringing the mind to a position where it is able to pursue and continue with the cultivation of a kusala, cultivation of insight, in other words. That is the perception of light. So the sixth instruction, if noting does not work, if reflection does not work, if recitation does not work, if massaging your body to create more flow, blood flow, does not work, if none of those things work, then you come into a position where you contemplate on the aloka sanya. Sorry, I think the aloka sanya. Then, if that aloka sanya also does not rid of the drowsiness of mind, then walking meditation. If Moggallana, that drowsiness still would not go away, then Moggallana, you should, perceiving before and after, be resolute in walking back and forth with the senses turned inward, with the mind not straying outward. It is possible that when you do so, that drowsiness would go away. That drowsiness would go away. So the walking meditation has been instructed as a last part of the 7 tips that is given by the Buddha to Venerable Moggallana to overcome his drowsiness. Should the walking meditation too not work, and if the drowsiness does not go away, then the last and final part that the Buddha says, and this is not taken as a tip, but only as a way of saying, rest. If Moggallana, that drowsiness, still would not go away, then mindful and fully aware, you should lie down, not just lion-like, on your right side, placing foot on foot, keeping in mind the time for rising and on awaking. Moggallana. You should rise quickly thinking, I will dwell without indulging in pleasure of sleep, or in the pleasure of reclining, or in the pleasure of drowsiness. Now, in this, if Moggallana, if drowsiness still would not go away, then mindful and fully aware, you should lie down, lion-like, on your right side, placing foot on foot. Now, in Sri Lankan culture, or sorry, on what Sri Lankan philosophy would dictate, is that placing foot on foot would mean sleeping with your toes aligned, or rather your thumb aligning with one another, right? So in the parinirvana, we would see the Sri Lankans would explain it as one foot together, meaning one foot together, which would be the toes together, which would be sleeping, and then the toes apart, which would be the parinirvana. In Burmese culture, they believe, or how they would speak about this, is that when resting, the Buddha would not have the toes together. That it is when sleeping, the toes would be apart. The toes would be not equal. When parinirvana, the toes would be equal. That is how the Burmese would differentiate on that, placing foot on foot. Keeping in mind the time for rising, and on awaking Moggallana, you should rise quickly, thinking, I will dwell without indulging in pleasure of sleep, or in the pleasure of reclining, or in the pleasure of drowsiness. Thus, Moggallana, you should train yourself. Quite strenuous, the Buddha's advice to Moggallana. Quite strenuous. You can imagine when the Buddha says, I dwell without indulging in pleasure of sleep, in the pleasure of reclining, in the pleasure of drowsiness, in the rest of the sutra, you would see how the Buddha speaks upon how the practice should trickle down, and through the embodiment of the practice, with the progressive journey, parts of your life should be mimicked to the Dhamma, in order that you are able to grasp and move forward with the Dhamma, which is so much more obvious. Therefore, Moggallana, you should train yourself. I shall not approach families with my nose in the air. Thus, Moggallana, you should train yourself. I shall not approach families with my nose in the air, with lapse of awareness, mindfulness, contemplation. Always having that contemplation of Dhamma working in your mind again and again, Sati Sampajanya, working in your mind. That heedlessness is what is said to be this nose in the air. Thus, Moggallana, you should train yourself. If Moggallana, a monk, approaches a family with his nose in the air, And Moggallana, there are families that are busy with various kinds of business, who do not think about a monk who has come. The family is busy with their stuff inside the house or whatnot. They are not minding, or they're not expecting a monk to come to be on their front yard, right? Then such a monk might think, who, I wonder, has cut me off from this family? Now these people seem to be displeased with me. Thus, through not receiving alms food, he becomes discontented. Being discontented, he becomes restless. Being restless, he becomes unrestrained in his senses. Being unrestrained, his mind will be far from attaining concentration. Where did that start? By visiting families with the nose in the air. That is where it starts, isn't it? The monk approaches the family with his nose in the air, meaning with heedlessness, without any concentration, without having his mind upon a subject, an object of cultivation, of practice, not being within the practice at that specific moment. Moggallana, a monk goes to the front of a house for alms food. But the family, not expecting a monk to be at their doorstep at this time, the family does not realize there is a venerable monk who is waiting for alms food, which is a normal occurrence at the time. Thus, when the monk does not receive the alms food because the mind is not within a specific object or realm of practice, it is aloof. Because it is aloof, upon not receiving alms food, his mind falls to this hindrance. What? Being discontented. Being discontented, now it proliferates. Because now that discontentment arose within the monk's mind, being discontented, he becomes restless. Being restless, he becomes unrestrained. Being unrestrained, his mind will be far from attaining concentration. But where did it all start? Starting on something, being aloof. So the Buddha's admonition here is always be with a subject, which does not mean that you always need to have a specific Dhamma working in your mind, a sutra working in your mind. We can't do that, right? We have other things going on in our lives. But this is not just Dhamma, or rather a sutra. The practice here falls into being present with the object. If you are doing something for some reason, having that reason in mind, having that target in mind, and not being swayed, having a steadfast mind to do what you have to do, having that object, the mind not being aloof, because when it is aloof, all these hindrances have easy access to the mind. So stay with the object. And in being with the object, the protection of that object or the protection of the mind is all that matters at that moment. Hence, having not received alms for discontent would not arise. Discontent having not arisen, restlessness would not arise. Restlessness not arising, the unrestraining of the senses does not occur. Without the unrestraining of the sensuousness occurring, the mind will be in concentration. The second, thus Moggallana, you should train yourself thus. I shall not speak in a confrontational manner. Thus, Moggallana, you should train yourself. When there is confrontational talk, there would surely be worldliness, wordiness. With wordiness, there is restlessness. With restlessness, there is lack of restraint. When there is lack of restraint, the mind is far from concentration. Then we would think confrontational talk. Confrontational talk, we know exactly what this is. We know exactly what this is. We know how often confrontational speech does not end up in both parties often being happy. There is at least one party that goes away hurt in some manner, to some extent. Even if the conversation carried on well, some party would be offended to a certain extent with confrontational speech. But to the meditator, coming to a level where confrontational speech occurs or unfolds, that points, it is a rather red flag in a way for a mind that is trying to come to a position of concentration. The mind becomes confrontational when the mind has a sense of restlessness within it. When the yogi, the meditator, is clear in where the meditator wants to go, no other short-term goals trumps that long-term goal of the meditator, which might be nirvana, which might not be nirvana, but working towards essentially eradicating the common unwholesome factors arising in our minds moment to moment, maybe. Getting rid of reacting with dosa, getting rid of reacting or having lobha all that often, let us say. In all of those instances, confrontational talk would surely lead to wordiness. With wordiness, there is restlessness. With restlessness, there is lack of restraint. With lack of restraint, the mind is far from concentration. So the Buddha points out at this confrontational speech. I shall not speak in a confrontational manner. Third, suitable dwelling place. Moggallana, neither do I praise all worldly engagements, nor do I, Moggallana, blame all worldly engagements either. Moggallana, I do not praise association between householders and renunciates, but as regards association with dwellings with few sounds, little noise, cooled by breezes, secluded from humans, suitable for solitude. This I praise, Moggallana. Here, the mind of a meditator, a mind of a yogi who has committed oneself to the practice wholeheartedly, that that yogi is not moved or does not feel solitude as a burden. That yogi's mind, having gone through a transformational lessons through the Dhamma and the practice, comes to value this essence or this solitude. When a practitioner, we know, goes too much towards a worldly engagement, those worldly engagements, we know, creates restlessness of mind, unsurety of mind, doubts. A lot of hindrances are given way through being so engaged with everything that is worldly, right? But the Buddha is clear. He does not say, neither do I praise, nor do I blame all worldly engagements, right? All worldly engagements. It is not in saying no, but it is in realizing that a life devoted towards the cultivation of the practice would go through a certain sense of change where the yogi, the life of that person, would come to embrace and look forward to and like dwellings with few sounds, little noise, cooled by breezes, secluded from humans, suitable for solitude. Why? Because this is easier to attend to the object of meditation. That is important, everyone. Because we find that in certain scenarios, we could very well use this solitude and seclusion praised by the Buddha, but the choices that have led to that solitude and, let us say, seclusion is not the most wholesome. I want to get away from people. That does not, that intention and this is not the same. Here, the meditator or the yogi or the practitioner likes and looks forward to, regards higher the ability of being in such a dwelling with few sounds, little noise, secluded, solitude, because he is able to be with the mind, the meditation object, in peace. That is the motivation for this solitude, not the passive aggression towards society or individuals. If that is so, then it's not Dhamma. Then it is not Dhamma. It has to come from a place, or this solitude that the Buddha is speaking of or about is where the solitude is for the contemplation, the inner journey that we are trying to endeavor upon as a support to that, as a support to that. He develops this I praise. When this was said, the Venerable Mahamoggallana said this to the Blessed One. In what way, Bhante, in brief, is a monk freed through the destruction of craving? One who has reached the utter end, reached the total security from bondage, from bonds, reached the highest in the holy life, reached the ultimate goal, the best of gods and humans. Here, Moggallana, a monk has learned and heard that nothing is worth clinging to. All things are not worth adhering to, which means with your level of wisdom, as and the way that we look at the world changes as our insight grows, as our insight grows. In that growth of insight and direct realization, one comes to progressively or subsequently realize that nothing is worth clinging to. This is very different from saying something like nothing matters. No, it is not saying nothing matters. It is saying nothing is worth clinging to. What that means is it's a world of difference. If we are negating nama and rupa in its absolute tense, then the only place that we would find ourselves in at the end of such a practice would be a deep, deep depression. In this path of practice, the yogi comes to realize that I do not need to cut a flower from its branch to admire and enjoy its beauty. That beauty can be enjoyed without a clinging arising towards that beauty, or without a sense of clinging or wanting to own that beauty. That is as if you see a beautiful rose somewhere as you go along a road, drive, or a walk, and seeing how beautiful that rose is, you want a bush planted in your own garden. Now you could see, seeing that rose was not enough, you want that clinging a rose there. This realization is nothing is worth clinging to, where intrinsically through bhavanamaya jnana you come to realize that all of these attributes that arise within the sense doors, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body, and the mind, and the mind, that all of those components that arise, that there is no need to cling on to it. Because with your clinging or without your clinging, still those dhammas will continue to arise. With your clinging or without your clinging, your past karmas will come to the front and give rise and result in your life and around you. With or without your clinging, all dhammas that arise will one day come to perish. With or without your clinging, mental states which are prominent in this moment will be soon forgotten at the rising of another predominant or a prominent object. This comes to be realized by the yogi with direct vision and knowledge, not just picking up on something that the Buddha taught. No, but intrinsically through your own exercise, experiencing that reality. And Moggallana, when a monk has learned that nothing is worth clinging to, he directly knows all things. Having directly known the nature of all things, he fully understands all things. How? Because when the mind is not tainted, it is as if when your own mind, when it is working with such clarity, everything that comes before you might be so easy for you to go through. There is such clarity, such energy, such purity in the way that you go through these different things that arise, that it's easy for you. When the mind is unhindered by the kileshas, that same occurrence becomes of all things that comes or arises within the mind. Having directly known the nature of all things, he fully understands all things. Having fully understood all things, he knows whatever feelings there are, whether pleasant, painful, or neither pleasant nor painful. As regards to those feelings, he dwells contemplating impermanence in them. He dwells contemplating dispassion in them. He dwells contemplating ending in them. He dwells contemplating letting go of them, realizing now there was a rose, right? There was a rose in my example that I used. there was a rose. In having direct knowledge and fully understanding, you realize that it was not the striking beauty of the rose that is at fault. You realize that it is the nature of the hindrances arising in the mind. It is because of the clinging that arose from the mind, within the mind, because of your latent tendencies, which arose seeing the rose, smelling the rose, seeing the colors that you knew before, comparatively seeing the rose with other roses that you've seen in the past. You understand that it was a combination of all of those causes that led to that craving arising for this special rose that you have come across now. In understanding, or in not being aloof, in being heedful, the person continues in that Dhammic contemplation as spoken in the prior part of the sutra. This is the second part of the sutra. In continuing those remarks made by the Buddha, in continuing those parts, having the mind guarded with an object, the mind focused in the path, that mind, when that progress, that practice comes to bear fruit through realizing that there is nothing worth clinging to, one does not only let go of the rose as an object, but also the mind, the taints of the mind that led to that craving arising towards that object, that craving arising towards that object. So, in continuing that frame of mind through the spirit of the practice, he dwells contemplating impermanence in them. The rose, the mind that takes a rose as object, and where that rose as object arose in the mind, which is at the eye base. All three of those points through the 18 dhatus is impermanent, he realizes. The eye consciousness also changes. The eye base is also impermanent. The object has arisen and passed already. Now it is just a mental object. The image of the rose, that too is impermanent. Why? Just imagine the easiest would be see a pretty rose, prettier rose. Then this rose, the attachment to this rose will just fade away, and even maybe fade away from your memory soon enough because you've seen a better rose now. Contemplates impermanence in them. In contemplating impermanence in them, he dwells contemplating dispassion. Dispassion. Fade dispassion not to the rose. Now it's internal. Dispassion in that mental continuum which proliferated the craving for the rose, right? Realizing that there is nothing to cling to, he dwells contemplating the bhanga, the ending of suffering, right? How it will cease. Then he dwells contemplating letting go of what? Not the rose, the defilements. The defilements that led to us being attracted so much to the rose. When he dwells contemplating impermanence in them, contemplating dispassion in them, contemplating ending in them, contemplating letting go, he does not cling to anything in the world. Not clinging, he is not agitated. Not being agitated, he himself surely attains nirvana. He understands birth is destroyed. The holy life has been lived. Done what is to be done. There is no more for this state of being. This Moggallana is in brief how a monk is freed through the destruction of craving. That is, one who has reached the utter end, reached the total security from bondage, will never ever be clung on to anything else again, reach the highest in the holy life, reach the ultimate goal, the best of gods and humans. And that is the end of the sutra. And that is the end of the sutra. You can see that in this sutra has to be studied with two other sutras, which is the Sariputta Moggallana Sutra and the Moggallana Sariputta Sutra, the Patipada. Patipada Sariputta Sutra, Patipada Moggallana Sutra, which is a sutra that takes place between a conversation, which quotes a conversation between Sariputta, Venerable Sariputta, and Venerable Moggallana, speaking about their own achievement, or rather how their practice is going. And we know that the progression of the practice has been quoted in 4 different ways. Dukkha Patipada Dantabhinya, Dukkha Patipada Kippabhinya, Sukha Patipada Dantabhinya, Sukha Patipada Kippabhinya. Right? Kippabhinya. These 4. What is Dukkha Patipada Dantabhinya? Dukkha Patipada Dantabhinya is the weakest path of progress that we see manifested as difficult to maneuver. Give me a second, I'm just sharing my screen. Right? So we have 4, which is Sukha Patipada Kippabhinya, Dukkha Patipada Kippabhinya, Dukkha Patipada Dantabhinya, Dukkha Patipada Kippabhinya, Sukha Patipada Dantabhinya, Sukha Patipada Kippabhinya. Of these 4, we find that the first part is the weakest out of all, right? The weakest out of all. Let us see. Let me write that down. Dukkha. I remember it in this way. Danta. Kippa. Right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4. When it came to Venerable Moggallana, do you know which path he followed or how his practice was initially? Do you remember? Anyone? So Venerable Moggallana.
Dukkha Patipada.
Dukkha Patipada.
Yes, I think that was the thing you're referring to, Bhante.
Yes. Uttara Moggallana Maharāja Vahanse Dukkha Patipada, Sukha Patipada.
Mama hitani issalla ekake Dukkha Patipada.
Dukkha Patipada. Right. Correct. You're correct. So there is Dukkha Patipada, Dantabhinyada, Kippabhinyada, Sujata.
ඒක නම් මට තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ Bhante.
Right. So Dukkha Patipada, Kippabhinya කියලා කියන්නේ Dukkha Patipada කියලා කියන්නේ Dukkha Patipada කියලා කියනකොට there is a certain sense of difficulty. Right? There's a certain sense of difficulty in trying to grasp the meditation, in trying to conduct yourself within the meditation. Right? That is Dukkha Patipada. Right. Dukkha patipada danta binya. Danta binya කියලා කිව්වම මොනවද කියන්නේ? There is two, danta and kippa. When one says danta binya, what is the difference? Right? Danta binya for the meditator, it is slow, right? Slow. Danta would be slow, right? Slow. So it is slow. When you say kippa binya, it is quick, right? Quick. So, as you could then see, dukkha patipada danta binya is there is a bit of difficulty, right? And the progress is also slow.
Slow. That's right. I think I got that.
The progress is slow. For others, there can be situations where the path is quite strenuous, dukkha patipada, but the insight or how the meditation progresses, right, is quick. That is dukkha patipada kippa binya, the second one. Okay. Then we have the sukha patipada. It's a pleasurable abiding. It's not a difficult process. It's a pleasurable, it's an easy progress, right? Sukha patipada. Not pleasurable, it's an easy progress, right? Sukha patipada. Sukha patipada. Easy process, right? Sukha patipada danta binya. Here again, this means it's easy, but the progress is slow.
No.
It's easy, but the progress is quick. Right? Quick. Now, out of these two, right? Now, out of these four, where do you think Venerable Sariputta was and Venerable Moggallana was? Right? Venerable Sariputta, when it comes to Venerable Sariputta, we know that Venerable Sariputta is the foremost in terms of prajna after the Buddha himself. After the Buddha himself. So when Venerable Sariputta was striving for attainment at the same time Venerable Moggallana was striving for attainment, it took Sariputta twice the time. It took Sariputta twice the time, but Venerable Sariputta was, of course, although it took twice the time, the Venerable Sariputta was, in other ways, far more polished. His scope of Dhamma was far more astute, right? Strong and astute. So Venerable Moggallana had dukkha patipada kippa binya, while Venerable Sariputta had, what did Venerable Sariputta have? Venerable Sariputta had
Sukha kippa?
dukkha patipada kippa binya, right? So Venerable Moggallana was dukkha patipada kippa binya, dukkha patipada kippa binya, while Venerable Sariputta was sukha patipada kippa binya. Thus, this one and this one. When it comes to the first, I'm just going to erase this part. When it comes to the first meditator, the first yogi, dukkha patipada danta binya is very weak. Is very weak. Right? Is very weak. Why? Because the practice itself for him is rather difficult, challenging. It doesn't come to him easy. He has to work for it. The yogi must work for it, really work for it. And the progress is slow. What happens during this time? They are the circumstances where the meditator comes to now fall entirely in its practice. The circumstances are far more and wide. Why the process is difficult and the insights that arrive are slow. Hence, within these two times, the meditator can easily fall as a result of the difficulty. Right? As a result of the difficulty. So the first, number one, is the weakest, they say. Could imagine why, right? And we could imagine why. When it comes to the second one, is dukkha patipada, right? Dukkha patipada, kippa binya. The proper way how to write this would be difficult, and slow. The second one is just slow. It's not difficult, it's slow. Right? It's not that difficult, it's slow. Hence, it's not as weak as the first one. It's not as weak as the first one. It's easier to maneuver, right? The first one is classed as low inferior. The second one is inferior.
Why inferior, Bhante?
It's inferior because the third one is also inferior. The reason they say inferior is in comparison to the last one, right? It's inferior in comparison to the last one because the yogi in the last one can meditate quite easily, right? And here, this is, of course, the fourth one is known as the best position, or rather the quality of the insight there is far more excellent, they say.
Superior, you could say.
They
Inferior.
say they don't use the word superior, they use the word excellent.
Excellence, right.
Because when you say superior, you're putting it into a sort of like a hierarchy, isn't it? Right? So they don't say use the word superior, they say inferior and excellent they use. The meditator who is dukkha patipada dantabhinya would experience a meditation practice that is difficult and slow. Difficult in the sense challenging, right? Challenging. In dukkha patipada kippa binya, the second one, the meditator would experience a meditation that is slow in nature. Sorry, difficult, right? This is difficult and slow, and this would be just difficult, right? Difficult. The third one would be slow. The fourth one would be quite smooth or easy, smooth. No hiccups. Quite smooth. Sukha patipada kippa binya. So whilst Venerable Sariputta was number 4, Venerable Moggallana was number 2. Right? When a meditator, right? Now, when we read these pieces of Dhamma and we try to patch it together, put it together, one might think, okay, what if I am dukkha patipada dantabhinya? What should I do? What should I do if I'm dukkha patipada kippa binya? A reason for this can be karmas. Karmas done in the distant past, karmas done in the recent past. There could be a karmic energy, an underlining tone, an underlining energy that is there, that is present. These are known as, we know, conditions. Conditions. The conditions for these above could be karma, isn't it, everyone? Karma. What else could it be? Right? When we say karma, I think we should break it down a little bit. So let us say lifespan. Aging, illness, all of that comes. Illness. illness. I'm going to write it, bad time. Right? Good time. In terms of, the stars. What else could it be? Because of karma, relatives, friends, lifestyle, all of these conditions, lifestyle, the place, the environment that you are in, the country that you are in, right? The country that you are in. I remember we had some monks who they were from a particular Middle Eastern country, right? And they were brilliant monks. They were Persian monks, right? They got ordained in the monastery in Sri Lanka, and they had to go to, have their visa extended, but they couldn't go to the embassy as a monk, which was a problem. They couldn't go to the embassy as a monk. So nearing their extension, we had 3 of them together who had come as 3 friends. And the 3 of them were very anxious and nervous with this visa extension coming up. So those would fall under environment, right? Places that you are born into, all of that, right? So karma can determine all of these things can be conditions, right? Then apart from karma, right? Apart from karma, we could take the thought processes of mind, how the mind works, yoniso mansikara, right attention, ayoniso mansikara, right, mansikara, those impediments, present moment thought coming into question. Then we could also have, whilst thought is coming into question, we could also have the resultants, the vipakas that aligned with Dhamma understanding itself. Where are we getting the Dhamma? Who is giving the Kammatthana? All of that would fall under or form a condition as well to determine this. But what is the position in this story? What is the position that would enable us to be performing at our level best when it comes to the practice? That would then be this part here. Trying very hard to assume or to practice yonso mansikara, right attention towards the 6 sense bases or the objects of the 6 sense bases, right attention towards the 6 sense bases, which is also the way that we have been talking and trying to assume our practice, everyone. So this brings us to a close of the session for today. Do we have any questions before we close the session, anyone? Any questions? All right. So if there are no any questions, thank you for joining. I hope the Dhamma today inspired you in some way or the other. We'll be having our Sutra session next week as well. Do feel free to join, and we will be doing another Sutra next week. Thank you all. Take care and good night. Teruvan Sarnai.
Teruvan Sarnai Bhante, Teruvan Sarnai.